Hey everybody, welcome back to Nerdium, the podcast where two grown men look at the world around them and decide it was a lot more fun when we were kids. So instead of focusing on all the adult stuff, because paying bills is only so much fun, we focus on all the fun things that made our lives worth living. Things like comics, TV, movies, video games, and anything our geeky little hearts desired. I'm one of your hosts, Cary, and sitting to my immediate left is our fearless leader, the international nerd sex symbol, the Commissioner Gordon to my Batman, and I realize I've already used a Batman reference, but I mean, come on, Batman. Anyway, my good friend Matt. For those of you that follow our Twitter account, at Nerdium Podcast, you'll remember that Matt issued another one of his infamous homework assignments. This time around, it was the spooky movie The Ritual. So before we get started, I figured I should warn you, there's no stopping the spoilers in this one. If you're afraid we're going to let something out of the bag you may or may not be ready to hear yet, take a break, pause the podcast, and go have a look at this movie. So with all of our spoiler warnings out of the way, let's sit down, turn all the lights back on, and join Matt and I while we reflect on the Netflix original, The Ritual. Now, Matt, maybe when you're ready, just turn on one or two more lights over there. I think I saw something moving in the shadows, so, All right, let's start this review.
Alright, so this week's episode is all about The Ritual from the guys at Netflix. It's one of Netflix's original horror movies.
And a mighty fine one at that, too. Came out really, really good.
Yeah, are you enjoying my homework assignments these days?
You're a harsh but fair boss. I can't complain too much. You could be asking me to watch Fuller House or some god-awful thing like that, so I'll count my blessings as they pop up.
Yeah. I haven't even watched Fuller House yet, so...
Well, we'll leave that up to Steve, and we can just exempt ourselves from that one.
Yeah, Steve can put that on his podcast, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah, I don't know. Imagine there's a lot of Twilight and cats.
Yeah, definitely a lot of cats.
Yeah.
All right, so The Ritual. It's a movie about a group of guys that decided to go into the woods on a little male bonding trip.
Well, it wasn't just a little male bonding trip. They went out there, like you do, because their friend gets killed in a store robbery. Mm-hmm. And it all starts off with these, I guess it's five guys at the start, sitting around, giving each other a hard time, like all of us men like to do for some particular reason.
Yeah.
And as they leave the bar, they decide to run into the store for another bottle of beer or a candy bar or whatever they planned on getting there. And that's essentially what kicks off the chaos. Mm-hmm. And then during that robbery, the number one friend, I guess, the guy that is the glue of their little group, gets done.
Yeah. And, it was a pretty well done horror movie. You have to appreciate the fine art of making a horror movie.
Well, I'm glad that they kind of stayed away from a lot of the weird... there's certain tropes in horror movies. I find thank goodness it was just a dream trope obnoxious.
Yeah.
Like when we start off and we're already on the mountainside, the whole store scene was a dream. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of good exposition as to why they would bother going to the mountain. Mm-hmm. In my notes, I basically say, best friend dies, let's all get together. Let's go to a restaurant, let's go to a bar. These guys choose to climb a mountain.
Yeah, well, they were talking about going on a guy trip somewhere, so they were discussing, I think it was Ibiza, Vegas, I think, came up. And then the buddy that ended up dying says these hills, was it Norway?
Yeah, Sweden. Sweden, yeah.
That was one of those Viking countries.
Yeah, northern Sweden.
Northern Sweden? Okay.
Yeah.
Even though it was filmed in Romania, but...
Yeah, movie magic.
Yeah. It just seems like these days, 1 in 20 horror movies you watch are actually good. You get, the Conjurings, pretty much anything done by, what's the director there? Wan? And any of the Warren File horror movies are pretty good.
The Warren File ones are pretty good. I'm a huge fan of the Insidious series.
Yeah.
So what I like about those and what I like about this one is that I like the suspense to build up. Mm-hmm. I'm really not a big fan of the pop scares. I enjoy getting scared. I'll go to watch a movie just to allow myself to get scared and then walk away. I'm not so pedantic as to sit in the theater and say, "Oh, that wasn't scary. This is all fake," and not get out of the experience what you go to see a spooky movie to get.
Mm-hmm.
What this movie I found did really, really good from beginning to end is just constantly build on that suspense.
It did. It didn't really do anything to kind of take you out of the suspense. It was just this kind of constant, creepy, awkward suspense that kept kind of climbing.
Absolutely. Hitchcock did a lot of stuff like that. Like, he was famous for saying, you show two people talking in a restaurant and then a bomb goes off. Well, there's your surprise.
Mm-hmm.
It's quick, it's done, it's over with. It's my 16-year-old love life.
Mm-hmm.
But where it really takes off is that if you show everybody a picture of a bomb in a restaurant and then show the people talking, you have that suspense. When's the bomb going to go off? Are these people safe? And it dwells on your mind. And the ritual kind of carries through with a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Something's out there. Something's hunting them down. But really, you don't ever really see the monster until really near the end. Like, you see glimpses here and there. You know the monster's there. Like, it's not like suddenly monster.
No.
Clearly these guys are hunted. There's little glimpses. There's a great shot of the guys, the remaining few going through, and you see the monster far off in the background, clearly just stalking them.
Mm-hmm.
A really, really great setup. Really good emotional ride for me.
Yeah. And, like, for horror movies, it has to kind of walk a fine line where it's not too frightening, where it dissuades the audience, where it like kind of takes you out of the movie, but it also can't be too soft.
Exactly.
Like, you have to be able to kind of somewhat invest emotionally and kind of into the story, where you're not just pulling out because it's too spooky.
Yeah. Well, exactly. There are things that get too scary that can get really distracting after a while, where you just want to turn it off and watch Disney cartoons for the next 2 hours to clean your eyes of what you just saw.
Yeah.
It also kind of stays away from big, bad blood and gore. There's a little bit of it there. Like, this, it's not to say it doesn't show up. It just seems to me that when it does show up, it's quick, it's done, it's over with. It plays into the story. It's not excessive. It's not needless.
Yeah, it doesn't, it's not like a gratuitous gore scene. Like, it doesn't celebrate the fact there's gore. It's there as an element.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, you could watch something like Saw, and I enjoy the Saw movies because I enjoy just the blood and the gore for what it is. But you don't get that with this movie. And I think a lot of horror movies start to get a little bit distracted when it comes to, oh, look at the blood. Look at the spooky, spooky blood. Blood, 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 blood. And it doesn't always work that well. Yeah.
And I find, like, some of the things, right at the beginning of the movie especially, like, it's almost like they drop little Easter eggs that just something's off, and like you said, it just builds. Like, there's the initial part where they're going into the forest, where you see the broken down VW bus, where they kind of point that out, but it's not really anything that kind of gets a second glance, or like why is there a van out here in the middle of nowhere broken down?
Well, they do have this kind of funny thing, like all horror movies, especially the, hey, let's walk off the beaten trail, which, point of advice for anybody that's listening, stick to the trail.
Yeah.
You just always stick to the trail. When your one friend says, hey, let's take a shortcut, you stick to the trail. Let your friend get mauled by bears or werewolves or whatever's in the forest. Just stick to the trail.
Yeah. Especially if it's through woods, because although it doesn't seem that daunting, the average person cannot navigate intense forest.
I've been like hiking through a lot of forests, and Canadian forests out where I was hiking were not overly grown. This forest, you couldn't see past the first line of trees. So
yeah,
not a place you're going to navigate.
No, it's actually very reminiscent of where I go hunting in the fall. So this year I'm going to probably be bringing a bigger caliber.
But the thing is that all horror movies, especially the kind of survival horror movies, you always see like there's always like three bad things that happen. Mm-hmm. The one friend tears his meniscus when he accidentally falls into a giant pothole that, if you look at the shot, the other two guys had to walk through that pothole, right? Like, it was a giant drop.
Yeah.
So I have no idea. They could have done that a little bit better. But then I'd say, oh, hey, let's take a shortcut. We have a friend that's, his knee's blown out, so let's climb through a dense forest.
Yeah.
Because that's always a good idea, 100% of the time.
Easy walking spot through the forest.
Yeah, and there is actually one scene that I want to tie, and this is the one funny scene of the movie, and that's the flask at the memorial scene.
Okay.
where they're all standing around and they have the memorial to the friend that was killed. And aren't we all get a big case of the feels?
Mm-hmm.
They all have the one dude takes out a flask, and the idea is that everybody's going to take a sip, and we're going to pour out the rest of the amount. I'm going to pour one out for the homie.
Yeah.
It was such an inordinately long period of time to empty the flask. Like everybody that should have been staring at each other, going, "I know you didn't take a sip." Because I have a flask upstairs. I don't think my flask holds that much alcohol.
No.
And he just stood there staring into space. And that was the one. I'm glad we did the funny part at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Because if that part had shown up any other time, I would have been really pissed.
It would have popped the suspense bubble.
It would have, I'm glad, we got the funny, let's rib each other nonsense trope out of the way. We got the funny joke out of the way.
And in a sense, it kind of cleansed the palate from kind of the tragic beginning. So you have a tragic beginning that sets up the whole story.
Yeah.
But they don't want you to necessarily be stuck with those maybe emotions right from that. So they kind of cleanse it a little bit. They do bring it back a lot through the movie, but
they do revisit that scene quite a bit, but in different fashions though. Like that scene is revisited, but it's always different every single. It is a different scene every time. It's the same scene, but it's a different scene. Weirder things happen as it goes on.
And they don't really explain anything to you until almost the end. Like, you see the creepy abandoned house.
There's a few creepy abandoned houses. There's a trail of abandoned houses in that forest.
You see the markings, but they don't really ever go into detail of what's going on. It's like from the perspective of the guys where you're there and they're wondering.
The only thing you ever know, the main character, the guy that witnessed the murder and hid, he's suffering some weird effect because he's always reliving that experience. Mm-hmm. And it's always a little different where the one guy that kills his friend stares at him and calls him a coward, or his one friend stares up and looks at him. Like, it always changes a little bit. But then, after the first night in the first abandoned house, one guy is naked praying in front of the idol that they found. Another guy has pissed himself gratuitously. The other guy is screaming for his wife. Like, clearly, there's some weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
The movie would have been longer, and it would have made much sense to show what these guys saw to make them do what they were doing. But, I'm kind of interested as to what they were seeing, especially the dude that was naked upstairs praying in front of the idol. I really want to see that transition. I want to know how we get from sleeping downstairs to naked praying.
Yeah, but the fact that they didn't go into it, once again, adds to the suspense.
Yeah, I know, for sure.
When they go into the main guy's little hallucination there, and that's when he gets stabbed by the monster, and the monster's ripping through the woods after. That had some chill factor.
That was weird. Like, I didn't know what to make of that, except for he's watching the first time I guess it's not the first time he's remembering the convenience store. The first time being the little exposition we get at the beginning of the movie. Mm-hmm. But it would be the second time when they first get into that house. Like, I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't even figure out what would make those marks until, I guess, later on when you actually see the monster. I guess the monster just gives him the 5-finger poke of death right over the chest.
Yeah. Because you weren't sure if he was bitten at first, and then you're kind of looking at it, and you're like...
They're deep, man. I'm surprised they did not bleed a lot more.
Yeah. Also, going into it, I was thinking it was going to be more of like a... kind of a better production Blair Witch project. So when I saw that thing ripping through the trees, I'm like, oh, that's a big-ass witch.
I didn't... When I saw that you brought this up as the next little homework assignment, unlike Bright, where I'd already seen some reviews and listened to some people have temper tantrums and read the Rotten Tomatoes score versus the audience score, which is always, interesting to look at. I just didn't bother looking at any of the reviews. I just like, you know what, I'm just going to go into this blind. I'm not going to read the plot. I'm just going to do a dry run, just run right into it. Mm-hmm. And it was not knowing anything, I think, really kind of helps propel what was going on, because in the back of my mind, I kind of saw it as like, your typical culty Wicker Man sort of weird movie.
Yeah.
I was down with that. Sure, why not? I was surprised that it was a monster movie, but it plays off well.
It does.
It doesn't take anything away from the experience having a giant monster in there.
No. And they don't fall into that trap that some monster movies do, is by showing the monster so much that it's no longer a horror movie, it's an action movie with a big monster.
Yeah, oh, for sure. The monster is always, you always see little glimpses, you can kind of see maybe a hand or a horn, and you never really, you know it's big, you can understand the size of it from certain glimpses that you see, but you never really know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Until the very, very end.
Yeah, like the beginning there, because I only saw maybe one preview, and it looked like a Blair Witch movie to me. And then you see different scenes, and you see him like ripping through the trees, and then you see the scene where he goes up to the ridge, and he sees the hand kind of touching the tree.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's a hand that's really high up in that tree. Like, what's going on? And then you see that there's something massive beside it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is not a witch. What's going on?
I had to rewind that scene about 3 or 4 times, trying to get a good glimpse of the monster, just to understand the scope of what I was looking at.
Yeah.
Because it took me forever. I'm like, did they actually show the hand the first time? So I'd rewind it a couple of seconds. And okay, the hand was there. Then you'd play it in slow-mo just so I could see his whole body. And I'm like, what the hell? Because I didn't want to just fast forward or look it up. I'm like, I really need to see what this thing is, but I didn't want to ruin the surprise either.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that with the suspense is that you really do get a good payoff when you finally get to see the monster.
Yeah. And they did a good job too. The creature design there, it's a pretty unique one, and it's creepy.
Yeah, I dig the Norse Scandinavian mythology of it all. Like I think she pronounces it Utan, which by the way is not how you think it's spelled. It's all kind of weirdness. But she of course brings up and then this is the crazy cultists that they finally find.
Yeah.
Because every good horror movie has good cultists.
Yeah.
And she explains to the guy that it's the Utan and it's the offspring of Loki, and we're going to pray to this, and so are you because you've been marked, and all this sort of good stuff. But one of the things this monster has a nasty habit of doing is decorating the forest with people's bodies, and not just people either. When we talk about those funny little tropes where we're just moving on and ignoring the blown knee, ignoring the VW. We walk by a gored out deer that's clearly like 10 feet in the air. Like no one climbs a tree with a deer on their back, disembowels it, and walks away.
Yeah.
And this is the monster's big kick, is that he likes to decorate the forest with people's bodies.
Yeah.
Which I thought was just like, one, gross, but really cool too. Like it was
different.
Yeah. You do start the movie where you see like the carvings in the trees and the weird little Blair Witch baubles all over the place. Like you do get that Blair Witch vibe. I can see why the previews would lead you that way. But then through the movie, you definitely go make a hard right from Blair Witch Town. Yeah.
And like I was reading some of the reviews online and some like the fun facts and trivia. And somebody was like, oh, that's a modern day Wicca script that's on the trees. And I was like, no, it's Nordic rune symbols. They're very similar. Like the Wicca script is kind of pulls from the...
Yeah, well, they pull from all kinds of pagan stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's...
But that person was actually shooting down somebody's point about it being like Norse based, and you're kind of like, that says that in the movie.
Yeah.
So...
Well, it's all based off Norse and Scandinavian mythology. Like that's... Mm-hmm. Which also kind of plays pretty cool, because in a lot of horror movies, like we usually center around the Catholic, Christian, Satan's after you sort of vibe there. Like it's always the evil spirits. We're always throwing crosses at it. Like, it's fine. Do what you got to do. But it was a really cool look at something else.
Yeah, like I feel like I've seen enough kind of Catholic-based demon movies that I think in a demon scenario I could probably hold myself now.
You can hold your own.
I think I know like the whole rites to an exorcism and all that, but no, I think when you get something that's kind of from a different culture or different background, it's spooky because you don't know much about it. Take for example The Ring or The Grudge.
Yeah.
When I first saw those movies that had the Japanese backgrounds, those movies were pretty terrifying. I had no idea what to expect.
Well, it's also different visually, right? Like we all have in our mind the idea of what a demon should look like based off of whatever writings you've seen. Like we're in a Western culture, so your typical horns, sharp teeth, discolored eyes, reverse Latin, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When The Ring and The Grudge and all that came out, the whole Japanese horror thing was really kicking off. So it was just new imagery to really assault your senses.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have tried to play off of that since then. And the ritual is the same thing. Like, you don't think of this giant centaur / demon / I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it really is. It's got a lot going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts on that creature.
Yeah. And yeah, you don't know the rules.
No, you don't.
To deal with it, so you're pretty helpless. Yeah,
exactly. Like, how many times have we just, like we said before, you could hold your own quote in scripture to a demon. Or, like we there was a lot of the Japanese, or at least the American version of the Japanese horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
So you started to see a lot of that. And then this one, it's just like, what do you do to a creature that's pretty much a god?
Yeah. He takes his best shot at it. It doesn't seem to do much.
Not a damn thing.
Yeah.
Not a damn thing. There really was nothing that he was going to do. Like, granted, he was firing an age-old rifle that just kind of soaked up into the monster's side and fluffed that off pretty darn quickly.
Yeah. Back to the hanging the bodies from the trees. I read somewhere that goes back to the Norse mythology with Odin. So I think something like Odin used to hang himself from trees, and that's where he got his knowledge, was when he's hanging from a tree.
So he got his knowledge from the raven or the crows that he used to send out and report back to him.
Yeah, there's that too. But there's something about the hanging from the trees and that. And I'm not a Norse mythology.
No, I always stuck with Greek because I knew all the stories off by heart, so it was easier for me. But no, it makes sense if they were reporting back to you. If the idea was that their spirit would report back to Odin, that would make sense.
Yeah, similar to the Catholic demon horror movies. By doing this certain type of act, like how they turn the crosses upside down or anything like that, it's kind of an aberration to the religion. So by him doing that, maybe he's kind of
fouling nature. You think? Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
His middle finger because he's the bastard son of Loki.
Mm-hmm.
Loki traditionally is not a very well liked god.
You mean outside of the Marvel universe?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of fangirl fiction on that. But anyways. Yeah, the whole thing that the monster is actually the offspring of a god opens up an interesting backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Also, to kind of get into the design of the creature, like, it's kind of interesting that it is like a centaur, but the head is kind of like the torso.
The head isn't like the middle of the torso, right? Like,
yeah.
Did you see the same thing I did? Because the idol looks like the arms come up into horn, like antlers.
Yeah.
And it looks like the head is missing completely.
Yeah.
And the torso on the human quote unquote part of the torso of the centaur, it's missing that nub where the head should be, and it looks like the head, or like this void where there are two blinking eyes, are somewhere in the middle of the chest.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really weird to describe because, one, it's pretty dark when you finally get to see it.
Uh-huh.
And two, even the antlers look like they kind of folded up at one point in time when he reared back in front of Luke. And it was, like we said, it was a busy monster. He had a lot of stuff going on that body.
Yeah. And I think one of the creepiest scenes where they actually really showed the monster was when he's in the main house there and it's on fire. And he's about to go through the door. And the monster, you don't necessarily see the monster. You see the legs of the monster.
Yeah.
And then you see the
hand,
the human portion of the monster kind of creeping in through the top of the door.
That's right. Yeah, pulling himself down to have a peek.
Yeah.
The one thing I didn't get that I really kind of wished, and I have my own theory on this, when he finally escapes after his buddy, the last buddy bites the big one with the monster, he breaks out of his shackles in the basement of the cultist's home.
Mm-hmm.
He goes upstairs where there's this nonstop groaning, weird groaning.
Mm-hmm.
He opens the door and there's all these dried husks. Like, think of your typical mummified, been dead for a while husks.
Yep.
And they're all groaning. And he takes his torch and he starts lighting them on fire. I want to know why the hell they're still alive. My theory is that because this monster grants eternal life or a prolonged life, that your body ages at a significantly reduced rate, but you're still alive, even as your body is rotting away.
Yeah.
So that is my theory.
That's the theory I walked away with too on that.
Okay.
So I think that's the point they're trying to get across if we both have the same theory.
Yeah, okay, good. Then I'm glad I didn't misread that. And the other funny scene, I guess it's kind of funny, and this is right in the middle when he comes downstairs and the old hag is sitting there staring at her. And he just decks her, like, just full on, just Mike Tyson's her right in the face. It was like, oh, okay, off we go.
Yeah.
Like, it gave me a chuckle, and then because of the chaos that was going on, brought me right back in. Like, it was done in a way that it didn't take away from the situation too much, but it did kind of give me a chuckle out of surprise.
Yeah, I think at that point they were done building the suspense, and now they're just kind of filling the story.
We were going through the big payoff.
Yeah, so it wouldn't, a little kind of comedic relief wouldn't affect the kind of emotion and the element of the story at that point. So
no, because I think by that time the monster was there. We saw the monster.
Mm-hmm.
The fire was starting. The monster was getting pissed. So it was. It was a good time to give you something to look at because we're in that. It's always that like last half hour of a horror movie where everything's finally, all the setup is paid off and everything's all firing off all at once.
They're wrapping it up. So, and they did really well. And then you kind of see that the memory of his friend's death there kind of almost led him to surviving the monster at the end with his friend looking at the axe.
Yeah.
And then he grabs the axe and...
Yeah, well, because, at the beginning, he had that bottle of vodka in his hand in the store.
Yeah.
He knew all he had to do was run around, just crack one of the robbers over the head.
Yeah.
Probably would have been enough to save his friend. And even when he's having one of his weird visions, the aggressor looks up at him, calls him a coward.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of expand on this through the story where even as one of the friends kind of points out, like, you could have stopped everything. We're all here because of you, get fucked, all this sort of nonsense. And then when he's trying to figure out why he's chosen, one of the cultists says, well, it's because you're weak, you have great pain. And I think that was kind of that moment where he realized he's only here because he's weak. And all these people around him are weak.
Yeah.
So unless he wants to spend the rest of his time there, and the monster even gives him a second chance to bow before him. Like after he's dicked around with the monster and fought and carried on, the monster still just makes him kneel. The monster, I don't think at that point in time was going to kill him. He was going to let him go.
Yeah. That's definitely the feeling I got from that too. So,
and kudos to him for doing the fight and doing the run.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the final end there, the final scene?
It kind of didn't necessarily tie, like, he escaped, so he's alive, but it didn't necessarily tie up anything. So with this movie, I found that it opens up a lot of real world repercussions.
Mm-hmm.
So we already saw that the monster's got some sort of kind of psychic ability.
Yep.
Yep. Is it proximity powered, or could he go back to England and then still have nightmares?
Well, I'm pretty sure he is going to be haunted with nightmares until the day he dies.
That's a valid point, yeah. That's a valid point.
I no longer think that the whole convenience store nightmare is ever going to be an issue for him. I think he is cured of that nightmare.
That's going to be his dream.
Yeah. He wishes to go back to that nightmare.
Yeah.
But the thing is that when they were on the mountain, again, outside of our little exposition dream, and I always hate it when it's, it was just a dream.
Mm-hmm.
But it in this case, okay, fine, quick exposition. When they were on the mountainside, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
When they were on the hill, on the trail, no problem. Even the accident of Buddy falling into the hole was just due to clumsiness. It had nothing to do. The one friend, he wasn't drawn to go into the forest. He just said, well, Buddy's been hurt, so let's stay off the beaten path and go crawling through the forest like a bunch of idiots.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think outside of the forest there's any issue.
Okay, yeah.
Even when they get into the as they're going in, that little minivan was there, but you have to assume the people that occupied that minivan went into the forest.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was the tent that they found from the 1980s with the family picture and the credit card and, the worn down tent.
Yeah.
Maybe it was their van.
Probably.
Pretty old van for the 80s, but I remember seeing those vans in the 80s.
You can still see a few of those vans these days, but yeah, no, it'd be like maybe 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
That van.
So the idea that somebody left a car and then it just went overgrown, fine. Things weren't weird until they got into the forest.
Yeah.
There was noise, birds chirping, nature sounds outside of the forest. The second they got into the forest, there was nothing but the trees creaking, and that was it. And even then, there was death of silence.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure that whatever the monster's got going on is central to the forest, and that's why the monster couldn't go past the forest. It's the Ichabod Crane effect, right?
Yeah.
The Headless Horseman couldn't get over the bridge. All Ichabod Crane had to do was get over the bridge.
What if the monster could do little minor influences here and there, and that's how he draws?
I think they would have mentioned. I think they would have mentioned that in the movie.
Yeah, that's possible.
Because these guys weren't drawn in to go there. They were just like, "Oh, let's get there quicker. I know a shortcut."
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, okay.
It was the infamous. Well, yeah, the map says keep going straight, but if I turn right and go down this alley, it'll be quicker.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of one of those setups. So I don't think that the monster's influence is going to expand. Now, when he has to explain to people where his buddies are, because they're all registered at the lodge, friends and family knew that they were going with him, and suddenly he shows up beaten to piss. And what are you going to do? Say, well, your husband's hanging from a tree intact. Your husband's been disemboweled, but he's still hanging from a tree. The real world consequences outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
If the movie had ended with him in an insane asylum, I would have gotten that.
Yeah.
I totally would have understood that. But I mean, and a lot of horror movies have ended that way with the crazy with the person that survives being locked up for either the murder of somebody or put away in a mental institution because they're screaming about a centaur creature in the forest kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. So it makes you wonder if there's going to be maybe a follow-up to it where either he goes back or somebody goes back for the bodies.
I could see a Vengeance sequel.
Yeah.
I don't know how they would write it. I don't know how they could write it.
If it wasn't him going back and say it was a family member that didn't really understand what happened in the forest, so it was kind of new to them, it was going to be a surprise to them, or if that monster's not the only monster in the forest because it's a magical forest with gods running around, but
they could do another ritual with either another Norse creature.
Mm-hmm.
They could do, like you said, a forest full of nightmarish monsters. They could play it off. I don't think they're going to.
No.
I think they tried to tie it up in a nice, as neat a little bow as they could.
Yeah.
It really was, in my opinion, a one-off. They didn't really leave things open to interpretation.
No, and it's kind of one of those stories that it'd be really hard to kind of recapture what was caught in the first one, where you had no idea what was going to happen, and it just built. Now, if they had a sequel, you're going in knowing something.
The best thing they could do for a sequel would be almost what the Insidious films did, and that's start going back for more prequel stories.
Okay, like maybe you talk about the family from the 80s.
Sure, there's the family in the 80s. I mean, how many... Through that movie, especially near the end around their little cult camp, multiple bodies hanging from the trees.
Mm-hmm.
So these are clearly not the same people, and I don't think the monster would bring somebody all the way just to hang them up on a tree. Yeah. But I think you could play off on the cultists, because the cultists offer the people as a sacrifice.
Yeah, like the one female cultist there that seemed like she was the most cooperative with them. Maybe she's got a good backstory. But ultimately, one of the biggest real-world repercussions I felt was you just told this guy that Norse gods exist. What's that going to do for him?
Even with that point, anybody walks away from these survival movies and say, oh no, there's totally a house full of cannibals, demons, wraiths, whatever you got going on. It's always going to be, it can only go so many different ways.
Yeah.
Even was it the Halloween movies where somebody got pinned for the murders? No, it was so-and-so. I can't remember what there's a couple of horror movies where somebody gets pinned for doing all the murders.
Yeah.
I mean, even Sarah Connor gets locked up for the Terminator nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's all that going on. But I would have, because I am greedy, I would have liked to have seen more of the monster. But I don't think the movie would have worked as well if we saw more of the monster.
Yeah. Do you think he's going to have his PTSD flare up when he goes to see the Infinity War? Sees Loki?
I think the mere mention of Loki ought to be enough to send him into a cold, cold sweat.
Yeah. Well, I don't really have anything left to say with the ritual.
No, oddly enough, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I mean, horror movies can be campy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to watch this movie and you're going to take the approach of, I'm a big, tough dude, I don't get scared, well, you're not really going to enjoy it too much. This is the kind of movie, these kinds of movies in general, are movies that you got to let yourself get into it. You got to let it go and let yourself feel that suspense. Like, I was surprised, man. I would recommend this movie in a heartbeat. It's a great contrast to our recommendation of Bright.
Yeah,
that's for sure. It is. It's definitely not a. You can watch it alone if you wanted, but I mean, I would recommend watching it with somebody that gets a little uneasy when you're watching spooky movies, if only to have fun with them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a movie best shared.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, so I won't be going into the woods anytime soon, so...
no need, it's still winter.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, that's going to wrap up this week's episode. As always, if you like what you heard, feel free to give us a review, subscribe. If you have anything you want us to cover, just send us a message on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or email us at nerdiumpodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, if you disagree, you can argue with Matt. Argue with Matt all day long.
All right. Till next time.
Have fun, everybody.